Welcome to Medical Myths, Legends, and Fairy Tales. I'm your host, Dr. Alan Christensen. Look, you know that between the latest online fads and the crazy media headlines, it's easier than ever to get confused about your health. And you and I just want to feel better and live longer. We want to know what works. And we can't wait for further studies. We need to make decisions today based on the best evidence we've got. Well, that's exactly what this show is here for. So let's get to it. Hey, Dr. C here with you. So here's a big episode. I wanted to get some more input on this whole issue about farming, and GMOs and pesticides and all that. And I decided to talk to a farmer about this. And I worked hard, but I found someone who's been on both sides of this argument in rather vocal ways. She was, in the past, strongly opposed and worried about pesticides, GMOs, and avoided all those things closely. Well, now she's a farmer. She goes by Farm Babe. So this is Michelle Miller. She's an online influencer. She's a columnist for Ag Daily, international keynote speaker, and an actual farmer. She's in northeast Iowa and raises sheep, beef cattle, and grows over 2,000 acres of corn, soybeans, oats, hay, and rye. She's been active with social media for over 5 years, and she's done this to help really connect farmers and the consumers. So she's focused on being a bit of a myth buster herself with food and farming. We had a great conversation. I'm eager to talk further with her, so please enjoy this time with Michelle.
Another episode of Medical Myths, Legends, and Fairy Tales. So this is going to be a lot of fun. We've got Farm Babe, aka Michelle Miller, with us today. So, Michelle, welcome aboard.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to have a chat with you today.
Yeah, I'm really jazzed about this. I've been talking to a lot of people about pesticides, GMOs, and really sorting a lot of this out in real time. And you've been on both sides of this discussion in the past. So could you tell us your story a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So my boyfriend and I are farmers in northeast Iowa, growing corn, soybeans, oats, hay, rye, and we raise cattle and sheep. So it's got a pretty diverse operation up there in northeast Iowa, about 2,000 acres. And I actually had more of a big city girl background before I met him. So I had come from Los Angeles and Chicago and was always kind of worried about that sort of thing, like I thought I, shouldn't eat GMOs and I should only buy organic and all this kind of stuff. It just sounded healthier. And that was kind of what I had believed. But then I met my boyfriend and learned he was farming GMOs. And I started my whole platform and my writing and speaking engagements and everything like that to really bridge the gap between consumers and farmers because, I do know what it feels like to be on both sides of the coin.
And from looking at your work, I realized that it's just that we don't really hear from farmers and get their perspective on this.
Yeah, exactly. We're only 1% of the population, so I work to give farmers and science a bigger voice.
Well, when it comes to the issues that you all are managing, like growing our food, we should hear more from you.
Yeah, I know. I was really excited to have this call with you today because I always talk about that, how we tend to talk to each other in our own little tribe. It's like farmers talk to farmers and doctors talk to doctors. And, it's like...
Health experts talk to health experts.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so important that we have crossovers on this. It's like I've talked to some world-renowned doctors, and but then they just totally drop the ball when it comes to pesticides, GMOs, antibiotics, hormones, whatever the case may be. And it's like, whoa, you need to talk about what we do. So I was really excited to do this.
Do you have any distinct memories from the process of, I don't know, like your view shifting or like how that came about, if there were certain facts or, how did that play out?
Yeah. When I first started my Facebook page, it was kind of how it all started when I was learning about what was happening on the farm because I had relocated to Iowa for Doug. And I'll never forget the time that I was looking around at his cornfields and I said, "Are your crops GMO?" And he looked at me like I had 3 heads. Well, of course they are. And I was like, what? But that's what corn is. Corn and soy are like 90 to 95% of farmers are growing it. And then I learned that it was because it was allowing farmers to use less chemicals, less pesticides, no more insecticides, less tillage, less fuel. I mean, so there's so many benefits to genetic engineering, but it's sad because the mainstream media and the average consumer doesn't hear that because they're so enthralled with the food labels and the food companies and their marketing messages of, organic is so superior because they don't use pesticides. But then I learned that was wrong, that I talked to plenty of organic farmers that still use pesticides. And so those were kind of like my big things, was when I was like, okay, if this guy that's so amazing is growing something that I thought was so terrible, well, if organic uses pesticides and GMOs aren't that bad, like what else am I wrong about? And so that's really kind of how it was all built. So when I started my Facebook page, it's been a little over 5 years now. When I started it, I did this post that talked about how much herbicide we were using on our GMO field, which equates to 22 ounces per acre. And so I did this little post and I talked about why it's important that farmers have to protect their crops. I mean, you can't just like weed your garden by hand when your garden is thousands of acres, you know what I mean? So you have to rely on the science and the herbicides to help maintain your farmland. And so, same with, you have to manage insects and rodents and whatever, it's a big part of a farmer's job. And so when I did this post about herbicide use, 22 ounces per acre, we only spray 2 days out of an entire year. And it's literally like 2 beer cans on an area of land the size of a football field. And that post went so viral that that's kind of what put me on the map when I first started. And that post has reached a little over 9 million people now, I want to say. So those were kind of my aha moments. And that it all just built from there.
That 22 ounces, that beer can per football field twice a year. Could you give us some context on what that was replacing and why that was a big deal? I think a lot of us might have a sense on, what total volumes might be for herbicides or pesticides.
Yeah, for sure. So before that, and this was another great thing to learn, was when you just talk to older generation farmers, right? Doug and I are in our late 30s. And when you talk to his dad and uncle, the herbicides or other pesticides they were using in the 60s or 70s were far worse. You had, was it Lorsban, Counter, Thymet, you had all these different insecticides and herbicides, Paraquat, Lasso. These were the herbicides and insecticides from decades past that we no longer have to use anymore. And so it was just really interesting where you talk to farmers, or not even just what we grow, but cotton growers or, sugar beet growers. When you were using 8 or 10 different chemicals back in the 60s or 70s, and now you're down to 1 or 2 and a much smaller, safer dose, that's really something to celebrate. And so we've come a long way, and someday we'll look back at 2019 and say, oh, thank God we don't have to use that anymore. But as of right now, it's really kind of interesting and how far we've come and how far we can continue to go with the science.
And something that I think might surprise consumers is to get a sense about just the relative toxicity of glyphosate. Do you want to talk about the idea of LD50 and how that plays out? Or?
Yeah, for sure. So glyphosate, also known as Roundup, has an LD50 value of 5,600 milligrams, which really makes it less toxic than, say, something like table salt, which sounds crazy, right? But it all boils down to the dose makes the poison. So when we as farmers use anything on our fields, first of all, we have to hold licenses, certifications, training, proper handling, proper management of these chemicals. We can't just go out and do it. We've got to take classes and continued education so that we're doing it properly. So there's that, but then every product we use has some sort of label on it. It could have a caution label or skull and crossbones. And when you look at something like salt or make like a sodium chloride type of natural pesticide, and I should clarify one thing because sometimes people get the word pesticide confused. Pesticide is an umbrella term that encompasses herbicide, insecticide, etc. Fungicide,
Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of people make that mistake, but pesticide is like an umbrella term. But so sometimes I use the word pesticide because I might be talking about insecticide, but just so out there. Yeah, so say like sodium chloride could be more of a natural product, but it's actually more toxic. It's a skull and crossbones product. So again, I mean, the dose makes the poison, right? So if you're using something, like I said, we use 22 ounces per acre of herbicide. Somebody else might be using 1 ounce or 5 ounces of something else. But then there's intervals before you can harvest and your produce is washed and stuff like that. So there's really so many food safety measures in place to ensure that what we're producing is in fact safe.
You know, a light bulb that went off for me in the recent past here was just the large body of evidence about the health benefits of diets that are rich in produce. I mean, I think no one can really debate that people who eat more fruits and vegetables are healthier than those that do not. And it clicked in my head that if the net effect of our pesticides was somehow more dangerous than the benefit of fruits and vegetables, those studies wouldn't exist. People who ate more produce would be less healthy than those that ate less produce. They would be the healthier ones.
Right. Exactly. That's what it's all about. You're right. There's a website called safefruitsandveggies.com where they talk about if you took the highest pesticide residue levels, right? Took the highest that you could possibly be exposed to on like your average fruits and vegetables or whatever. You would have to eat like hundreds or thousands of servings in a single sitting, you know? So it's like, you know, every so often, could there be a very minuscule, like parts per billion level of pesticide on your food? Well, sure. That's why you're supposed to watch first. But unless you're eating like 200,000 servings of strawberries in a single sitting, like it's not going to harm you. And so I really like that, safefruitsandveggies.com. And then there's an article in Forbes that was called, 10,000 Reasons Not to Fear Pesticides or something like that. But, you know, if you want to be healthy, nobody ever said eat less fruits or vegetables, right?
Right. And I've seen studies about consumer behavior when they're told about dangers of pesticides, dangers of GMO, they don't become more selective. They end up consuming less produce.
Exactly. And it's so sad because we need to focus on eating healthy whole foods. But fear is such a popular way to sell a product nowadays. So if the organic and non-GMO are spending I heard it's like $3 billion a year through like 330 different organizations, leading with fear. Yeah, so it's like they sit here and say, oh, well, agribusiness, you know, all they care about is money or whatever. And it's like, well, what do you think about organic and non-GMO? And non-GMO project is like a $19 billion food label. Like, you think they don't have something to gain by misleading you? You know what I mean?
And do you want to mention the whole butterfly story? I learned about that one rather recently, too. That was surprising to me.
The butterfly story?
Well, that's been used as the logo for the non-GMO. Someone explained that to me recently in the interview, basically how there has been a decrease in some butterflies, but not because of harm from glyphosate, but because of just less milkweed. You know, farmers didn't want the acreage of milkweed. So it's almost implied that there's some toxicology that's affected them, but it just wasn't the case.
Yeah, I know. That's really interesting. I wasn't exactly sure what you meant by that, if you were talking about the logo or whatnot, but
I was.
Yeah, I know. It's really interesting how that all plays out and everything. And yeah, I mean, that's the other kind of fun thing or interesting thing about farming too is, like I said, we have to have licenses and certifications, but protecting our pollinators is such a big part of it. And like, if you look up in Iowa, we have the Iowa bee law, where if somebody has to use a pesticide that might harm bees or something like that, right? Because some of them can, and very, but there's certain intervals where you spray, right? Like you spray at night when they're not foraging, and then you do it at a certain hour and time where it's not going to affect them, or a lot of those products are being phased out, or like we really don't need to use them anymore. I think it used to be, like I mentioned earlier, it used to be so much worse. And, you know, science is just coming out with with so many improvements, and we all care about the earth. At the end of the day, we all care about our earth and our health, and kind of trying to find these common ground. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to say too that it's exciting to talk to you because I know when we were emailing back and forth, we had this conversation about, you're like, I'm trying to give science a bigger voice in the naturopath. It's like a naturopath, right?
Yeah, it's a naturopathic clinical doctor.
Right. And it's so interesting because I don't really know a ton about that. I have a couple friends who swear by it. But when you're in this realm of science communication, I think so many people want to jump into it's all like, well, chiropractors and naturopaths and homeopathy and all this stuff. It's all quackery. And then it's like, well, I don't know about that, but I think so many people want to just lump it together and keep a closed mind. And so when you mentioned that you were this, like, taking this, I think your exact quote was, you were an odd duck. It's like, that's awesome. I was like, that's awesome. I was like, I love science and I want to learn more about what you do. And I think it's great that we're doing this to really kind of bridge these all sorts of different gaps and divides, right? Like, we need to step outside of our little bubbles, like a pro-GMO bubble or a naturopath bubble or a natural healing. And we all have to come together and talk about it. What can we learn from each other to move society forward in general and not be so closed-minded as society? You know what I mean?
I think a pitfall is that it's easy to identify ourselves with our ideas and our beliefs. And I think the healthier thing that I do my best to do, and I'm trying to help my profession to, is to put more weight into, how do we come to those beliefs and how do we evaluate the evidence? And data evolves and data changes. We have to have some way of taking that into account.
Yeah, completely agree. Always have to be looking to see what's new.
Along those lines, we won't even delineate everything about the various purported health risks, but I realized too that we have to, a process that's important is to rely upon the consensus of evidence. If I think about like a science class of seeing at what temperature water boils, so for those who are in the U.S., it's roughly 212 at sea level. But when you do experiments like that, you won't always see 212.0. You'll see different numbers. And so you average those together and you understand that for various reasons you can get outlying data, but you wouldn't one time get a number of like 209 and say, oh, that's the right answer. No, you would average your data together and say, here's the consensus. And that's how it works in science too. You can always find data that seems to detract a common belief or a common idea, but it's the consensus that matters the most.
Right. Yep, absolutely.
And I think there's been a lot of weight putting into finding, odd outlying circumstances and drawing a big spotlight on those as proof or evidence. But no, that's misleading. That's not how we do things in science.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll be right back after word from Integrative Health.
We hope you are enjoying this episode of Medical Myths, Legends, and Fairy Tale. This is Dr. Roz at Integrative Healthcare. So often we hear from our patients that their primary care physician has told them that their thyroid and hormone levels are fine and they should not worry. Yet the patients still have symptoms of severe fatigue, thinning hair, and weight issues. Unfortunately, this is too common with thyroid care. The good news is we can help and there is hope. The doctors at Integrative Healthcare, including myself, specialize in naturally treated thyroid, hormones, and adrenal issues. We would love to get you started on the path to ideal health. From the comfort of your own home, we can get treatment from one of the doctors at Integrative Health via telemedicine. Go to integrativehealthcare.com to become a new patient today. Use code PODCAST20 for 20% off of your new patient visit. Again, this is integrativehealthcare.com. Use code PODCAST20. Get back on the road to thriving.
And now, back for more medical myths, legends, and fairy tales.
So how did you come about with this naturopath idea, and because this is going to be a fun podcast to share for my followers, because so many of them are science, science, and it's like naturopath is like, what's that? So how did you come across it? And what's, you're obviously interested in what we do as farmers. So how did that kind of all come to fruition with everything?
Sure. And here's a quick response to I think in many cases I enjoy a lot of websites like Science-Based Medicine or various skeptic groups, and they will often look at my profession as a whole and judge us by some of our least scientific examples in terms of our ideas or whatnot. And that's also unfair. So me, myself, I was raised in northern Minnesota by a farm family. And I had some big health challenges. I had seizures, very uncoordinated. And I was a smart kid. I could read at an early age, but I couldn't play physically. And I became obese. And I was really frustrated from that. And so dabbling in health books and engaging in various lifestyle practices, hit or miss at first, but over some time, it just changed my life. And it gave me something I wanted to share and grow upon. So I was about to go to the University of Minnesota Medical School and just then continue learning more about nutrition and apply that in practice. But doctors pulled me aside and said, "Hey kid, that's neat, but you can't do that. That violates your standards of practice. And even if you're helping people making a big difference, your board would not support you in that." And I was disillusioned and unfocused and not quite sure where to take that. And I learned about the naturopathic profession. There was a new school opening in Arizona. I really wanted to do medicine in a sense of embracing technology, diagnostic methods, looking at internal medicine issues, but relying heavily upon lifestyle as a treatment and still understanding the role of technology, intervention, medication, but really championing diet, mindset, movement, immersion with nature, those sorts of things. And so this profession was the exact ticket for that. And as I've gotten further into it, I've come to realize that it's a very diverse profession, and there are many, many people who share the exact same feelings that I do about the importance of science, and they weigh in on a lot of these same issues exactly as I do. And there's a range of diversity in views. So a big goal that I have as almost like a legacy type project I'm working with friends on is how do we as a profession have a consistent way of evolving our stances and having to be better aligned with our facts.
Right. That's really interesting. So that's kind of what I suppose drew you into, I guess the farm babe. Kind of what I do is just because you kind of have a farming background too then, right?
I do. And I'm friends with Food Babe as well. I'm friends
you
with
are? No way. No way, really? Oh my God, that's awesome.
So I know all these health influencers. I'm connected with them. I'm friends with them. And this is the GMO one is never something I've really campaigned against. I've seen it. I'm friends with Jeffrey Smith. I know him quite well.
Wow.
But I've just been seeing more data making me question that.
No, that's awesome. I'm obviously not the biggest fans of them, right? but here's the deal. There's so many times where we shut doors of people that you really could. How am I trying to say this? Don't burn bridges. If you have these good moments of crossover where you have different perspectives, you can really make an overall better decision on what's best. You can't sit here and just say well, this is right and this person's wrong, and so because that person's wrong, I'm just not even going to talk to them. If I was face to face with them, I'd love to have a conversation. I'm banned by the Food Babe. It's kind of why I started my whole Farm Babe platform, was because I was silenced. And I don't appreciate people that don't allow farmers to talk about farming when it's I left one comment and I'm just you guys, all I want to do is help you not fear your food and realize that, we all care about your health. And so, it's great because, when you first talked to me about going on your show and then I saw you were on Dr. Oz and all this stuff, I was like, oh boy, here we go. But I never turn it down. I never turn it down. I've never had anybody do a bait and switch on me, knock on wood. I've never had somebody be like, oh yeah, come on my show. And then they're just totally rude to me. But if they were, I still would take it as an open opportunity to have a conversation, because even though not everybody's going to agree with you, there are going to be some people out there that still can, and it still gives you an opportunity to open minds and open hearts and realize we're on the same team a lot more than we think we are, Yeah. But people go ahead.
I say everyone wants healthy food for themselves, their children, a safer planet, and better environmental stewardship. And we're all in alignment on that.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so those shared values are important. And when it comes to your views on medicine, I think it's so important because so many people are, and we get that as in the farming world too, right? You say, like somebody says, "Oh, well, I don't feel well. It's because I ate GMOs," and it's like, well, no, you don't feel well because your diet is nothing but deep fried foods, and you don't exercise and live a very high stress lifestyle.
Probably not sleeping enough.
What was that?
I said probably not sleeping enough. And
yeah, there's so many aspects that go into health and that are so overlooked, and they think, well, just this magical pill. But how many times do you hear of people that, lose weight and they get more sleep or they change their jobs, and the next thing you know, their health is transformed? It doesn't need to be like a magic pill or, well, I only, I went plant-based or, I went organic and I felt better. Well, it's not about the fact that you went organic and felt better. It's about the fact that you probably eliminated about 5,000 calories from your diet in a week, or something, whatever the case may be, And I'm not a doctor, so you can speak to that better than me, but that's just,
Couldn't agree more, but a big pitfall, and this is one of my biggest interests these days, is just the fact that, we can misinterpret things. We can have a very real outcome. You could change your diet in a lot of ways and you could feel better, but you're right. Did you feel better because you dropped the GMO? Or did you feel better because you're eating less processed food? Or did you feel better because you feel a greater sense of personal control over your health? There's all these factors that are relevant.
Right. Exactly. 100%.
And that's the nice thing about science, is that we can look over larger groups of people, larger populations, and we can sort some of those things out. But it's so easy to draw conclusions. And then the tricky part too is, something that none of us are immune to, is this idea of confirmation bias. We filter data. We easily accept data that supports our conclusions, and we can readily find reasons to reject data that goes against them.
Yep, totally. And Google doesn't make it. Google doesn't make our lives any easier sometimes, right? I always said that.
Go ahead.
That was another post I did that had gone somewhat viral-ish when I first started. I was like, how when you have a stomach ache and you Google it and you think you're going to die in 5 minutes, why don't you just go to the doctor? And people are on this, because you can Google medical symptoms and come up with 100 different things. You can Google food and come up with 100 different things. But, farmers, the ones that do it every day, we're real people, and we're very easily and readily acceptable and readily available to help people with these questions. They just have to choose to not be intellectually lazy. And when you Google something, just because it shows up on the first link, who's the author? What's their background? Are they selling something? What's their motive? Is there, what I mean? So there's so many different aspects of it that, people have to be better about critical thinking. And, it's like with the GMO thing too. It's like, well, everything we eat's modified. Everything, like organic foods can be bred in a laboratory, non-GMO foods can be bred in a lab. Everything is modified. There's really no such thing as natural food anymore,
Well, so, there's processes by which we now know that plants and bacteria spontaneously modify themselves genetically. And even before we had ways to do that in a targeted fashion, there are ongoing ways by which that's just done randomly. With radiation, you get random genetic change, and no one's been concerned about that. So the field has not been consistently built out.
For sure. And that's another important part of this discussion is scientists. You've got the doctors and the farmers and the scientists. So building on these networks where, people ask me questions about nutrition. Well, I'm not a nutrition expert, but I do know some really great dietitian friends. Or they ask me questions about, like science. Well, I'm not a plant breeder, but here's a friend who is. And just to say, I'm not an expert on everything and I don't have all the answers, and anybody who says they do is full of it. But say, hey, here's how we build on it. Here's how we talk to people that we might not agree with on everything, and move forward with, discussions on advancing everyone.
And talking about pesticides as a broader category, thank you for clarifying that for me. So you can't escape them by choosing organic food, and one can even argue you can't escape them by growing your own food and putting nothing on it because plants make pesticides. So the question becomes, which pesticides are dangerous and at which concentrations, and that's where it does take analysis. And that's where you were talking before about the LD50 and how we know certain amounts for certain things, but there's no, if you say everything is dangerous or they're all dangerous, then we have no food left. So that's not an answer either.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what was it? I think in the 1920s, one of the most popular pesticides was like arsenic. But it's all natural. But I mean, the dose makes the poison. But when they talk about, well, our food's poison, it's like, well, we've really come a long way with that. And also, back in the day, it was something like 60% of people were farming 100 and some years ago, and now 1%. And so people want everything to be so perfect, but they don't want to grow it themselves. Or they just think like, we should all be able to do this and we should all buy local. And it's like, yeah, that's wonderful. I love buying local, but I live in Iowa in January where we get blizzards. And sometimes I like to have a banana in January. And so, it's to understand. But if more people took the time, I think that's like my favorite thing to do now since this Farm Babe thing has taken off. I get invited to different farms, or I also really love to travel. And so when I international travel, I choose to find local farms and write about and learn about what it is they're doing. So I'm going to be in Ecuador next month, and I'm touring like the world's largest rose farm. And and so I see these videos of how they're made, and you don't always think of that. Like, we just take so much for granted in our country. But when you think about like this rose farm, they do roses and flowers for like the Rose Bowl, like the Rose Bowl parade and stuff. And when you think about the sheer amount of flowers, like weddings and events and, Valentine's Day and whatever, it's really cool when you sit down and actually look and understand and think about it. And we can do this with coffee. Just this morning, I was watching mango videos. About mango harvest. Like, this is how I geek out in my spare time, is watch harvest videos. But it's just something I've become really interested and passionate about. And the more you tell people little fun facts and snippets, did you know that brown rice and white rice actually come from the exact same plant? Like little things like that. And then they go, really? Like, they think that it's a completely different variety. And it's like, no, it's just they scraped off the bran. It's brown rice. They scrape off the bran, and then it's white rice, and it's the same thing. And the little things like that it's like, wow, just getting people excited about agriculture and wanting to talk to more farmers is part of the battle too,
Speaking about just like massive projects like the Rose Bowl, could you just touch on the idea of sustainability and just the differences between using science behind agriculture or trying to do things in ways that are, purely organic or purely as they were done 100 years ago, and how that could affect our population?
Yeah, totally. So sustainability is kind of like this marketing buzzword a little bit, right? Because I think all farmers want to be sustainable, right? If you're not really going to be a farmer for long. But I'll give you an example of our farm specifically. So we have earned awards for Farmers of the Year for soil and water conservation. And this is another cool thing because we do a lot of organic practices on our farm, because the original premise behind organic was, to focus on biodiversity and natural methods and, all of these things. And there's some really excellent science behind organic farming. If people want to talk about permaculture or solo pasture or whatever, there's some really great science behind some of this. But then when that science becomes more mainstream, organic is no secret, grown leaps and bounds. Organic farmers can use those practices, but guess what? Conventional or GMO farmers can use all those practices too, and then some. And so my boyfriend's brother is a soil scientist, and he has kind of gotten us as his guinea pig for the latest and greatest. And so we've earned awards for Farmers of the Year for soil and water conservation because we've been no-till for over 20 years. We use cover crop. We test our soils. We're doing crop rotation, really getting into the nitty-gritty of that. And guess what happens? it's in farmers' best interest to be sustainable, because guess what? When we focus on our soil and we're doing these things no-till, that means less fuel. That means less wear and tear on equipment. That means less expenses. Using less pesticides, less expenses. Sustainability can also mean profitability. And so when you take some of these messages that are out there about, they're just blasting their fields with chemicals, and they're just destroying their soil. And it's like, really? you know how expensive it would be to destroy our soil and to use more inputs? We want to use less fertilizer, less pesticides, because guess what? The price of like corn and soy right now, for example, is not very good. A lot of farmers have a very tough year. So the idea that we're just sitting here using all these inputs isn't really good for business. And so, I mean, it's true that there's some like good old boy farmers that sometimes are a little apprehensive to change. But now that we're kind of coming into like the next generation of more of like a millennial type mindset, and don't get me wrong, some of the good old boys are excellent too. But, I think we're going to see and continue to see a huge shift in, say, like, regenerative is supposed to be the biggest trend for 2020. And I would consider us to be very regenerative. I would consider us to have a lot of organic style practices, except we grow GMOs. And so this idea that only one label can be good, it's like, no, any farmer can do a great job regardless of size or label, and so I love telling that sustainability story.
Well, and basically the economic interests of the farmer are aligned with those of the consumer and also with those of our population, the planet as a whole.
Exactly. And it's not perfect. It'll never be perfect. But, when the naysayers complain with their bellies full and their clothes on their back, I say, well, why don't you show us how it's done then? And then they all just shut right up.
Well, this has been great. I really appreciate your time. I'll put some links up as far as so people can connect with you. But what's the best place you would direct someone to learn more about yourself?
Sure. My website is thefarmbabe.com, thefarmbabe.com. I am at thefarmbabe as my handle. And you can just search Farm Babe on my Facebook page. Facebook is where I do most of my outreach, but I'm also on Twitter and Snapchat and Instagram and all that good stuff. So yeah, check it out. I'm always happy to answer questions and connect with people as best as I can. So I'm really thankful you had me on your show today.
It's my pleasure. So yeah, thanks again for your time, and listeners, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Hey, Dr. Christensen here. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode. Is there a topic you'd like me to cover? I'd love to hear from you. Just go to Dr. Alan Christensen on Facebook or Instagram, write your question, and use the hashtag #MedicalMyths. Did you find this show helpful? If so, please take a minute and leave us a rating on iTunes so that others can know. Thanks much, and I'll be back with you real soon. Bye-bye.